500 million years ago, and there'd be no mountains. This whole area would be pretty flat, some small hills, and you'd have an inland sea that extended from down in Montana right up to the Yukon, a huge sea. Rivers flowing into it, carrying sediment from the low hills around, sand, clay, mud, and so on. So gradually, the inland sea built up something like a coral reef. Trillions of small creatures that died, left their skeletons, that formed into what we call limestone. Limestone that formed Three Sisters, Mount Rundle, and so on. Different kinds of limestone. But that was the strongest rock that we have in this area. And it was formed in the inland sea, and it got to be about almost 1,000 feet thick. Meanwhile, on the deltas of the rivers, they were carrying sand and silt and clay. If they carried sand, it would spread out on the delta. Then they might get a period when, for 10 million years, it was mainly silt. Then 10 million years, it was mainly clay. So the sand would get buried. So would the silt, so would the clay. And under its own weight, it would get compressed so hard that it would form rock. And it would become cemented. So we've got the layers. We've got the limestone, the shales, and up here we've got a mixture of rocks. And this is where vegetation started to grow on these deltas. And it wouldn't be vegetation like we see here today. It would be equatorial. It would be like you find in the Caribbean or Hawaii. Huge palm trees, but these were bigger than any we have now. These were like 5 feet in diameter and 70 feet high. And the ferns were 30 feet high. So it was vegetation, as Trump would say, it was the biggest vegetation I've ever made. So all this would get compressed. So you might have 1 million years of vegetation rotted, fell down on itself, maybe 80 feet of vegetation, then suddenly the vegetation would be swamped by another layer of sand, then silt, then more vegetation would grow. So you've got alternate bands of vegetation, sandstone, siltstone, vegetation. But the vegetation's oxidizing, it's under pressure. You know what happens when you put your long clippings in a pile? If you go back a month later, the bottom layer is black. It might even be hot. It might even be on fire. That's spontaneous combustion. In other words, nobody lights it with a lighter. It just occurs because the oxidation is going to its final level. And that grass is getting burnt. This is what happened with the vegetation. It got compressed. 80 feet of vegetation might become 20 feet of poor quality coal. I'll come back to the quality of coal later. Then, as it got pressed more and more and more, the vegetation, the wheat coal, would give off some of its dirt and some of its moisture. So as it got buried deeper and deeper, it would become higher quality coal. But then something happened. All of a sudden, the North American plate starts to move southwest, and the Asian plate starts to move northeast, and the two of them come together. And the strongest rock, the limestone, breaks up through the weaker rocks, as you can see here. So those weaker rocks are broken up completely by a bed of limestone that comes up, and it comes out 4,000 feet, almost a mile, and it finishes up there. And being feet below us, it comes to about 3,000 feet above. But, and this happened about 300 million years ago, but at the same time, the mountains are not like we see now. They're pretty smooth and so on. The kind of rocks that form the mountains now have become affected by wind, by rain, and by glaciers, which has created the craggy effect we're getting at now. The hanging valleys, like the one at Grassy Lakes and so on. So all this is happening, and to imagine that strong rock coming up from below, breaking up, going up there. Imagine the pressures, imagine the heat. And what that does to these coal seams, it breaks them up and twists them slightly through the strata here. Now if you look along this, what, 80 yards of strata, you can find every angle in there that you can imagine, from 0 to 90, somewhere in those features. For example, at that far end, you've got it. You see where the rock is going up and over? That's an anticline. And then it dips down at about 20 degrees. Then all of a sudden, the strata is almost vertical. And you've actually got a fault that displaces the strata about 30 feet. Then you've got this here where the angle is about 50 degrees in this direction. And you've got all kinds of angles, and then up at this end it's probably 50 degrees. Now, imagine trying to mine, there's no coal seam in there worth mining, but imagine if there was, how do you mine it? You find it, you put a lot of money in, you follow it, suddenly there's a fault and the coal seam vanishes. That was all part of the risks of mining here. At the next stop, I'll show you how the mine managers and the miners themselves found a way of turning these gradients to their advantage. In other words, what they learned, don't fight it, use it. And we'll come to that at the next level, at the next stop. So here's the very poor quality coal, the first product that comes after vegetation, lignite. Then it becomes subbituminous coal, which is what we mine at Drumheller, Lethbridge, and for power stations in Edmonton and so on. And then it becomes bituminous. Now this is a coal with about 10,000 BTUs, British thermal units, per pound of coal. Lignite only has 4,000. Bituminous has 10,000. Anthracite, ours is semi-anthracite, it has 12,000 to 13,000. And this coal was the best coal in Canada for two reasons. For each pound of coal you got a tremendous amount of heat. But what was equally important, it burned without giving off any smell or any smoke. Subbituminous, it was used a lot, but it was awful. It had a high sulfur content. They didn't realize it then, but it had a huge environmental impact. You could take anthracite, the briquettes they made, I used to burn them in my fireplace. If you put some in the evening, 14 hours later, those 20 or so briquettes were still burning, without smell and without smoke.
Gerry, over here.
Yeah.
And what's different coal with most of the coal in Britain?
In Britain? We had anthracite in Scotland and South Wales, and then we had every other kind. And we mined mainly bituminous and mainly coking coal for steel plants.
All right.
That was bituminous coal that had a certain quality that when you burned it partially and made coke out of it for steel making, the coke still had all its carbon and was very strong, because you're putting coke in the bottom of a blast furnace that's 100 feet high. On top of the coke you're putting limestone And on top of that you're putting iron ore. And that blast furnace is producing iron for you. But to produce iron, air and flames have to go up through the mixture, which means the coke has to be strong enough to take the weight of all the material of that. Okay, any other questions on this?
Question about the methane. Is methane
Oh.
prevalent in a certain type of coal?
Yeah. The outer side here, I measured it, and we had 2,200 cubic feet of pure methane from each ton of coal. To put that in context, if you've got an ordinary kitchen with a washer, a dishwasher, if that dishwasher was coal, it would give enough pure methane off to almost fill your kitchen. It was the gaseous coal I've encountered. I've been in about 300 mines worldwide. It was the gaseous. Cape Breton is gassy coal. It has a reputation for being dangerous. It has 800 cubic feet to the ton. We have 2,200. And yet we're, in the history, 90 years of history, Camel mines only had one explosion. And it killed, I think, 4 men. Way back in, I think, 1970. So actually, although it was very dangerous, see, some of the most dangerous mines are not those with the most dangerous conditions. They may have average conditions, but the miners and the managers get complacent and they don't even test for gas. And then they get a pocket of gas and all hell's let loose. So I think I'll close this bit down here and we'll move on. So I'm here. If you want to follow me, we're going to turn at this corner and I'll wait for you up about 200 yards up till we all get together. How many cars have we got there? 1, 2,
8.
7.
8 including Gerry. 8.
Let's say the white car is the last. When the white car gets up to our lineup, give me a good, remember I'm deaf, a good beep on the horn. Okay.